Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we've been to see Ne Zha 2. This is the sequel to 2019's Ne Zha, which is a Chinese animated, 3D animated fantasy adventure epic film based on a kind of Chinese myth, which, you know, I'm not very familiar with, as you might imagine.
No.
And also the 16th century Chinese novel Investiture of the Gods.
Yeah.
This is a sequel which continues its basis on those things. We podcasted on the first one. The original film is basically about, it's a kid called Ne Zha. He's invested with what was called at the time a demon pill. It's retranslated in this film as demon orb. And the other half of this kind of mystical entity is the spirit pearl, which went into a different kid. And the demon pill is kind of bad and full of fire energy, and the spirit pearl is kind of good and full of water energy. But the pills were switched, as I recall, in the original film, and kind of the bad kid, which is Ne Zha, the evil kid, is raised by good parents, and the good kid is raised by kind of bad parents. And that was a kind of fundamental thing. They both feel out of place, they meet each other, and rather than kind of fighting, they sort of get on, because all of a sudden there's someone else who understands them, that's like them, you know. And we had our issues with that film, but we also thought it was interesting.
I liked it.
You liked it very much. I didn't like it as much as you did.
Yeah.
But by the end, and the film was promising, you know, the start of a Ne Zha universe, as everything has a universe in recent years. You were saying, want to see the second one when it comes out. Well, the second one has come out. The second one has not only come out, it has become the most successful animated film of all time. It's become the 5th highest grossing film of all time. It's the highest grossing non-English language film. It's the first non-English language film to hit 1 billion and hit 2 billion. The first animated film ever to hit 2 billion. It's crazy how successful this has been. The first one made something like 700, 800 million. So that was like no slouch. This one has gone through the roof.
And yet the cinema in Birmingham was empty.
We saw this at 4:30 on a Monday afternoon. But yeah, you're right. I mean, cinema completely empty. It's also a very long film. I suppose that's not quite as unusual as it used to be for kids' films. This is like over 2.5 hours, close to 2.5 hours. I think it feels its length.
Yes. Although, I don't know. Yeah.
So one thing I would say is I was trying to think, how am I going to sum up the plot to this film? And God, there's so much going on in it. It's kind of it obviously picks up from the end of the first one, where the fight that, you know, obviously ensued at the end of that has left these two kids. So Ne Zha is that, you know, the demon one, as I say. The other one's called Ao Bing. They need new bodies. They've kind of been sort of struck. The film does open with a sort of précis that re-explains all of this, although it goes by so fast and there's so much in it. I was like, oh my God, I can't keep up already.
You're going to be speaking hours if you retell the plot. So.
Yeah, so basically they need new bodies, and we start off with them getting new bodies or being generated new bodies, but then so much starts kicking off. There's a lot of characters, there's a lot of kind of plot strands that intertwine and come back, and I was sort of thinking, this is not a criticism of the film. I just think it's so not for me in that sense, that just like, there is a young audience that I think is capable of just understanding everything that's going on. I mean, they have the mind for it, and I just don't anymore. It's one of these films that made me feel like a very old, slow man from a different time.
Yes, I kind of felt the same way, actually. I think, initially anyway. So first of all, I couldn't remember anything from the first film, right? I mean, basically, I had to see an image to be reminded even what the character looked like. And even, you know, when I realized, oh yes, it's this film, I still really couldn't remember anything about it, which is, even for me, a bad commentary on the film.
Sure.
And then I thought, oh my God, right? Because, you know, part of the way that the film is structured is as a kind of video game where they go on different levels, right? You know, and I hate that. Yeah, I think kind of it lessens kind of narrative engagement in a way. So I was thinking, oh my God, how boring. I thought, oh, if Mike wasn't here, I'd leave, right? You know, But then, to be honest, the animation did grab me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were such kind of extraordinary images, and they were filmed in motion or drawn in motion or drawn so as to construct motion in ways that I thought were so extraordinary that actually that did grip me almost right to the end, right? Like, you know, I wasn't just engaged with the story. I wasn't even engaged with the fight sequences, really, except when they became kind of really visually spectacular, which,
Sure, yeah, I know what
which
you mean.
it does, right? So I thought, so I was glad I'd seen it with you and now walked out, actually, because, you know, it is incredibly beautiful. And also, I think it speaks of an ideology, right? Because I was thinking, when you watch Disney films, you don't see armies of 10,000 people individually drawn that then create a cluster around a tree. Like, you know, yeah, like, you know, I thought there's a sense of, you know, the individual in society in which, you know, society or groupings of people act as one, yeah, in a way that is kind of almost unthinkable in a Disney film, you know, which is all about the individual, really, right? And which is even Finding Nemo or something, you know, when you see, like, I don't know what you call it,
School of Fish.
a school of fish, right? I mean, it's nothing like, yeah, the sheer amounts of figures and monsters and angels or whatever they are that you see kind of in this film, and then the formations that they collectively make. It does speak of a culture in which the collective, yeah, is important, and obviously it inspires all of these, or it's trying to convey all of these values of the culture. You know, the thing about discipline, yeah, and application and so on, which is supposed to be the same the world over, except maybe, you know, in the West they don't entail quite so much sacrifice. Yeah.
Visually, I agree with you. There's so much to admire. I should just say that it's written and directed by Jiaozi. He wrote and directed the first film as well, and I think his direction it's really confident. I think he gets the tone just right, you know. And when it comes to the action, I mean, you said you weren't that engaged with the action. Early on, I was thinking, because it starts off with kind of a big action scene, and I thought, wow, this is really like American inflected action, the way it was directed, and like I thought, you know, if you kind of swapped out the setting for kind of an American setting, or we wouldn't even necessarily have to do that, but it's just kind of like the shot selection, the editing, the compositions felt like Marvel or something like that. I thought, like, this is not what I would expect from, you know, the best of Chinese action cinema. But as the film went on, I started to see much more kind of invention or just skill and kind of thought in the action scenes. I think that there's a couple of action scenes that do, maybe more than a couple, but there's at least a couple of action scenes that do a lot with slow motion, and that has a really good effect because the action is very, very fast paced, but it will like rapidly ramp down the speed of a shot into slow motion at the kind of point of impact of a punch or a kick or that sort of thing, and so it maintains this intensity of action while letting you see things quite clearly and understand who's getting hit and how and so on. I think that was really, I think it's clever. It's not just kind of cool, it's clever.
Yeah.
I think the slow motion in the scene with the kind of electric guy, there's a guy who turns out to be essentially kind of electrically powered, and so because he's electric, he can move instantly from one place to another, and you need slow motion to emphasize, you know, really sell that, and it does it very, very well.
I thought that was spectacular.
And and it, visually spectacular as well. The light and dark in that is so wonderful.
But let me qualify. I mean, it's not, you know, when you're using American style action, it's, you know, American style action of the last 30 years is like completely influenced by Hong Kong action cinema.
Sure, yeah.
Right. So
but it's always, I suppose, it's kind of, it's often kind of, I'm going to put this kind of badly, but it's often kind of dirtier or shakier, or like what I kind of associate, maybe a little unfairly, maybe in a bit of a stereotypical way, with kind of the best of sort of Chinese action cinema, because, you know, we tend to only get the best across culture, is a control and a thought that's got, and rehearsal and all that kind of thing that goes into a scene that makes it really great to look at. And one of the things that I associate with a lot, because I see a lot more, obviously, American action cinema, so it's the good and the bad. I think I associate a more kind of rough and readiness, I suppose, and that's kind of what I was feeling early on in this.
Well, I don't know. For me, I wanted to make a distinction between, the earlier action sequences, which are often one-on-one, and which I began to find dull, right? Like, basically the whole film at the beginning is one action sequence leads to another, and and I just, I was finding it very dull. I couldn't get involved in any of it. But then, halfway through or near the end, like that scene that you mentioned, right? Or, the scene with the cauldron, bursting into a tree. I mean, it's conceptualized in completely different ways, really. And I found it beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the film still never engaged me emotionally, or actually really not even in terms of its story. But graphically, I was kind of dazzled. And actually, that's why I'm glad I didn't leave earlier.
Yeah.
Right? Because I thought that was just amazing to see.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And, like the huge caveat which I would place on engaging with the story and the characters, which I think I kind of already have placed on it, is that I'm like so perfectly happy to accept that I am not the target market of it. It is very much a children's film.
And also it's very, I don't know, Chinese cultural.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe the reason why we're not engaged with it is because we don't feel that way about, I don't know, duty to clan or, even filial duty and, kind of, I'm sure there's much more at stake in, the relationship between the brothers or between the clans or who knows, right? Like, I just kind of wasn't invested in any of that. But I recognize that others might be.
Yeah. There was just a stat I've spotted, but I've lost it. Hold on. This is from the Wikipedia page. Unlike most films, the Wikipedia page for Ne Zha 2 has an impact section. Not just release and reception, but impact. Like, already, this film has an impact section. And so just it's got this $2.1 billion gross. But one thing that it says is, as of the 6th of March 2025, in fairness, we're on the 24th now, so this is a couple of weeks out of date, less than 2% of ticket sales have come from outside mainland China, with its opening from 5 markets. So in other words, this has taken an awful lot of money, but the vast majority of that money seems to be coming from Chinese audiences within China, right? And there is a huge market there's like 1.5 billion people in China. But despite the fact we're seeing it here, we saw the first film here. It's had a worldwide opening. It seems like it's also fairly.
But there are diaspora audiences of Chinese all over the world.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So I'm sure it's kind of popular with those audiences as well. But I think I was grabbed more by, the beauty of the animation. I mean, the sheer detail of it, right? What it was doing with it, because, one of the things that kind of fascinates me about even decor, right, is I remember having this discussion with a friend about a cafe in Barcelona and how beautiful it was. And, you thought, well, kind of, previously what I'd liked and thought beautiful were simple lines, right? And then what you realize is that, these more luxurious things, what they do is they also create simple lines, but out of an amalgamation of little detail. That if you look at it from afar, it has like these simple kind of lines. But if you look at it closely, there's a million, it's composed of a million little things, of leaves or whatever, right? Kind of, and then kind of that becomes not only kind of beautiful, but also you get a sense of luxury and richness and, And actually there's something about this animation that made me think of that, right? I.e., when you have these swarms, so the shape and the direction of it is like simple, but also you see that it's composed of all these little angels or whatever, right? Yeah.
You get like a murmuration of starlings kind of effect.
Exactly.
Is it starlings? Or whatever,
yeah. And that actually is a signature in the film. You get the same in those monsters under the cauldron, right? Like, my God, you look at it and you think like, there's like, I don't know, 1,000 monsters in that image, and they're each different, and it's extraordinary, right? And then when they move and they get into close-up, like there is something kind of quite wonderful about that, I think, that you do not see in American animation, at least so far, or to my experience. Right?
Not an awful lot of it, at least. I mean, a huge amount of effort has gone into making this film. And mind you, I would say that the most beautiful imagery in the film is the imagery right at the start, I would say, which is during that opening sort of recap of the story, which is all kind of hand-painted, or it's probably digital, but the hand-painted style. And it's kind of, they're probably animating it on 4s, so it's a kind of slightly stuttery frame rate, so it gives you that kind of hand-drawn feeling again. But that's just, like, the film starts off with this, sort of hand-painted animation, which is just full of colour and full of life and beauty. And I thought, God, because I remember the original film had a little bit of that as well. I think there was the thing where kind of paintings sort of came alive at one point. But, the vast majority of the film, as here, is 3D animation. But, it starts off with this explosion of colour. And I was thinking about colour as well because, yesterday we saw Mickey 17, and one thing that you talked about was the gunmetal grey look of just about everything, and there was very little by way of kind of splashes of colour in that film. This film, it's like we saw this film on the same screen as yesterday, so it's not the projector's fault. That film had no colour. This film has so much. It's so beautiful. It's
beautifully designed colour, right? Like for example, the jade green, of those formations in the sky, right? Like, I mean, there's such a wide palette of colour.
The breath of the dragons attacking the sort of force field things, and the way that light, the way the light kind of renders on objects. So there's like lava is always illuminating something, particularly in that cauldron, and it's so kind of stark, it colours everything. The thing that we mentioned, the quote unquote electric man fight, where all the light source is the electricity, and it kind of bounces everything. It's also kind of in the rain, and that helps with these reflections coming up and things. It's once when it gets, because it's not always doing that. Sometimes it's dialogue and it's just cut the characters talking to each other, and there's like nothing really special going on visually. But when it starts to express itself visually, it's incredible to look at.
Yes, it's
worth it for its own sake.
Yes,
and it's not. It's lighting, it's color, it's design. Those skulls coming alive and kind of glowing. It's like it's all those things coming together. It's also the composition and just the idea of this wall of skulls. It's wonderful.
I mean, that was worth seeing the film for. I was wondering, and maybe I'm just being cliched and possibly a racist outlook or something, but I was thinking if part of like these swarms, of beings, in creating one movement and so on, was also not tied to ideas of the individual and the collective, and because it seemed to me that when the whole city is destroyed, and you see like these millions of people who are now rocks or whatever, that there was no emotional residue to that. That I mean, you were meant to feel sad, but it's not like,
I know what you mean, but I don't think I feel sad if that happens in an American film.
No,
it's just image, unless the film is really selling the sadness of it, focusing on it.
Well, I think this film not selling the sadness of it is part of my issue with it.
But
not my issue. You're just wondering, what does that signify? That it's not seen as a big deal that millions of people die.
No, I get you, but I kind of think I feel like I've seen similar imagery or had the similar idea sold to me in the same sort of way in non-Chinese cinema. In other words, like I get what you're going for, but I'm not sure that I think there's enough of a difference between that and kind of Western films that I've seen to make much of it. I just feel like I have that. I don't think other films tend to sell that more than this does.
I don't know.
Sometimes it does, but I think it always comes down to, if you think about like the snap in Avengers Endgame, when half the world gets deleted, what's really sad is that our favourite characters are getting deleted.
But that's part of it.
We already have the identification with them. These characters we don't have identification with. These are just figures turned into stone.
Well, but that's also a choice. I mean, the director could have chosen to show the mother or the father, or
Well, he did at one point. Then we go back to them.
So you you're told that this is a loss, but actually you're not meant to. You don't experience that loss. I think actually it's well, no, that's not fair. It is treated as a big loss, and a betrayal, and so on. Anyway, maybe I'm wrong. It's just, I did think that there wasn't an emotional payoff to the destruction of a home and a place in the way that there are, because countless fantasy series are about that.
Yeah.
But actually they are different because, it isn't a Holocaust. I mean, basically, you're told in this film that only one person survives, and that is to tell the tale, right, of that city. I don't think that's quite the case, even in, when cities or villages are ransacked or pillaged, and in fantasy series, like, you see people getting killed, but you don't have the wholesale destruction of the whole place.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, if you think back to, we're going back probably 10 or 12 years to Man of Steel. I think that was about 2012 or so, which was the DC, Superman movie. Like, all of Metropolis got razed in that, with the fight between Superman and General Zod, was it? But the thing is, the reason I'm picking up on that is not just that everything got destroyed, but that there was public response to that, and there was like think piece kind of responses that said, how much more destruction can these films have, paying no attention to the people who lose their life.
I remember
that became a thing
myself.
in kind of the Western media.
Yeah.
The Avengers films had something similar, and to the point where they started to incorporate things in the films which said everyone's been moved out of the city. They would have a thing that said everyone's been evacuated, now we can have the fight there, so no one's going to get hurt. So there was like a real response within the films themselves to people, to audiences saying, I'm not sure I feel comfortable with all of this destruction of people who you don't care about.
No,
so,
I get it.
So that's definitely been, there's definitely been that kind of blasé-ness about that level of destruction in Western cinema. There's also been a response to it.
Okay, so I was being racist.
Well, in that case, let me be racist as well. I was thinking about the character designs. I don't have very much experience of Chinese animation in particular, kind of Far Eastern animation more generally. Anime in Japan is obviously like a very key kind of form of animation, and it's very popular in the West, but I hardly ever, never really seen. I saw the Pokemon series when I was a kid. That's about it, really. And I was thinking about the character designs here and whether they are sort of intended to appeal to a worldwide audience more than a kind of Chinese one, because this is obviously set in Chinese mythological history, kind of Chinese folklore, but only kind of one of the characters, I would say, is kind of really outwardly, obviously Chinese looking, who is the kind of...
I think that's what you see in manga as well.
Yeah, this is what I'm thinking. Like, obviously, there's kind of also anime and manga inflected design to these characters, but maybe that is just more generally a thing. Like, the thing is, it sounds like what I'm asking for is like a Chinese stereotype, caricature, right? That's not what I'm asking for. But I do kind of wonder, like, is this just what is accepted that kind of Chinese / Far Eastern people look like in animation? Because they sort of don't look all that Chinese to me, if you like. Do you see what I mean? I'm really trying not to sound like a dickhead there. But,
yes.
Take Ne Zha, for instance, the main character, Ne Zha. I thought, but for the haircut, he really looks like Riley from Inside Out, for instance, who is, American kid. There's not... These aren't...
I think what I saw is more westernized. Though maybe actually it's just a different Chinese ideal that, because it was very manga-esque. But actually part of what I associate with manga is also, I think, a westernization, though maybe westernization is the wrong word for it, right? Because they always have, like, a kind of spiky hair. But often they're blondes as well in manga, actually, which, but, the noses are very, like pretty,
long,
tiny.
straight.
Yeah, long, straight. So I think there was some kind of inflection of that manga ideal onto this film, and I think the manga ideal is also a kind of a westernization. In my view.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was. That's the sort of area I was thinking. But honestly, my experience of manga, anime, and kind of just animation generally from this region of the world is is really limited. But it does feel like the dominant trend of what it looks like.
Yeah. I mean, there was that example in the film where they were saying, do you want to look like this, or do you want to look like that, or do you want to look like that? And actually, not quite, but almost, you know, if you'd had a Swedish animated film, it wouldn't be that different to that, yeah? In terms of, you know, bodies and shapes and features and, so I noticed that as well. Well, actually, all of the other personages, you know that they come from folklore. They are kind of, you know, the short, squat man, the kind of the piggy-looking. Yeah.
Oh, there are a lot of types here that like bodies and things are being built off of certainly.
So anyway, kind of, I suppose for me it's one of those films that you feel, you know, maybe I wasn't emotionally involved, and maybe I wasn't emotionally involved because I don't have access to the culture, right? And I'm sure there's maybe a lot missing that if I had got a hold of, I might have found it more emotionally affecting. That said, the structuring of the narrative around levels, I think is something that's designed to diminish that type of emotional involvement. It's a different type of involvement, you know. And all I can say is that I appreciate seeing it, but really only because I found the animation itself so inventive, actually, and dynamic and different to what I'm used to seeing.
I mean, I would say I'm perfectly okay with the kind of the structure and the writing and all that kind of stuff being something that just kind of overwhelmed me.
Yes.
Because I felt like if you are kind of mentally equipped to understand this and to watch it and to take it in, you know, to accept all of this audiovisual energy, then I think it probably makes a lot of sense to you. It's not that it didn't make any sense, but it's a little bit of a struggle to follow. There's so much going on. There's so much energy in it.
There is, but then if you think about it, you know, think of an Avengers film. How much you actually do know about all of these figures, and you bring something to it.
That is also something I was thinking about. Yeah.
In this film, we have nothing to bring to it.
Yeah. Well, it's like I often think back on a time when I went round for dinner to one of your Saturday dinners with your friends who are all kind of your age, and you know, you invited me along, and that was very nice of you, and it was lovely to meet them. And I was at one point saying something about Star Wars. I was saying something about like the latest episode 7 in my opinion, and blah blah blah. And you stopped me halfway through what I was saying, and you said, these guys have never seen Star Wars. And I was like, oh my god, there are people in this world who haven't seen Star Wars. Like, it hadn't occurred to me that you could not know this stuff. But of course, the number of people who've seen Star Wars in the world is less than the people who haven't.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's kind of a specialist area of knowledge, despite the fact that if you're in it, you know it all.
I mean, to be honest, it's hard to imagine anyone my age or younger who is unfamiliar with it. But the fact is that these people were 5 to 10 years older, and actually they had never seen it.
Yeah.
So.
So what I'm saying is, like, if they watched Star Wars, their response would be the same as me watching Ne Zha 2, going, I do not get this at all. This is so much information. I don't know what's happening. And this is just, I'm from a different era. I'm from a different world.
Interested. That's it. Yeah.
So, you know, so there is that, and I accept that. But, you know, that's kind of, you know, that is what it is. I don't necessarily think that's like a good excuse for making, I guess, an incoherent film, but I don't think it's incoherent. It's just, if this makes sense to you, if you're in this world, I think people clearly are fucking responding to it. I mean, you cannot...
It has to be easily and immediately accessible and enjoyable to have incurred that box office. It's just not that way to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I should point out as well, because we mentioned Inside Out, and the previous highest grossing animated film of all time is Inside Out 2, which came out last year, and a little bit like this, you know, because... So the reason that I knew that Ne Zha 2 existed was because we had a YouTube comment from someone on podcast of the first film saying, you should do a podcast on Ne Zha 2, it's the highest grossing animated film in human history. So I know, because of that, I went, oh, it's out. But similarly, when Inside Out 2 came out last year, we didn't cover it on the podcast. We didn't really notice it was out. I think a lot of people, it kind of passed a lot of people by. Like, I didn't see a lot of talk about it, but because one day I was Googling the highest grossing films of all time, I discovered that at the time, it was the 8th highest grossing, I think it's now the 9th, highest grossing film of all time. it made $1.6 billion. And it's like, that's a crazy, crazy amount of money for a film that no one was really discussing, no one's really talking about. Kind of similar to this, like we're talking about it, and it's very big, and it is getting some press, but still, in the great scheme of things, I think it's passing a lot of people by, in the West at least, you know.
Well, I think,
it's fucking nuts to have these massive, massive box office record-setting successes
without a discussion.
Without a
I
discussion.
think it's because they're animated and because they're family films, basically. You know, I suspect that a lot of other critics and cultural types don't go to those films.
Yeah.
You know, unless they have, young children.
Yeah.
Which I would expect. Yeah, but I guess I'm still. You would expect some of them to. Anyway, any last words on the film?
I kind of enjoyed it. I'm sort of glad I saw it, but it is a film that is for people who have different brains to me.
Yes,
This would have been for someone with my brain were I 25 years younger.
But also, if you're interested in design, in animation, different modes of animation, and just actually, examples of sheer graphic beauty in film, this is a film to see.
Oh, one last thing I'd say is I'm really glad of the lack of homophobic jokes in this one. One thing that you particularly commented on in the first one, was that there was a running homophobic gag that we laughed at the first time, and we weren't laughing by the fifth or sixth time. And there's none of that here. There's still a lot of puerile humour, which I criticised the first time round. Here, I was actually kind of glad of it at points. At least I understood it.
Yeah, exactly. We are the lowest common denominator for this film. Yes.
But I mean, those are the things, like its tone and its energy I really like. It's just that there were things I could not keep up with. I had to kind of disengage and recharge after the film for half an hour before we could start the podcast.
Yes.
It really wore me out.
Which I don't think has ever happened before, really.
No.
Which is interesting. Anyway, we recommend on the whole. So if you get a chance to see it, you won't get many opportunities to see Chinese animated films like this. So do give it a go if you can. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. We're eavesdropping on the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, and YouTube Music. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and Blue Sky, eavesdropping.bsky.social, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. The one other thing I thought of was, because obviously the subtitles, it's in Chinese, it was subtitled. I don't know if you noticed, but in the last, I would say, half hour, 45 minutes of the film, I started to notice mistakes in the subtitles. Like the word swap was spelled SWOP at one point. It was kind of missing a capital letter at some points. The grammar was not quite right. And I thought, genuinely, I felt like maybe the translator was also getting kind of worn out by the end.